The rise of the digital platform means that technology reaches more people faster than ever before. Technology is changing the skills that employers seek. So workers need to be good, as you know, on the more complex problem solving, teamwork, and adaptability. But also, in advanced economies, of course, you have the gig work and other things. So, in order for this to succeed, the lens that we're taking is that the government needs to do three things. One, invest in human capital, especially in disadvantaged groups, and also in early childhood education to develop new skills that are increasingly in demand in the labor market, such as what we just talked about, the higher order cognitive, as well as the socio-behavioral skills. The second is that there needs to be the social protection needs to be enhanced to ensure universal coverage and protection that does not depend on having a formal wage employment. And three, of course, resource mobilization. So, so I think in addition to the different techniques to build and make robust the education, there are roles that the governments need to do, particularly investing in human capital. And so I'll talk a little bit about the Human Capital Index. And here the objective is rapid progress towards a world in which all children are well nourished, ready to learn, and can attain real learning in a classroom and enter the job market as healthy, skilled, and productive adults. So, in this regard as well, the World Bank is engaged in, we've just launched a Human Capital Index, which quantifies the contribution of health and education to the productivity of the next generation. And to complement this index and help countries take action, they've also launched or near to launching a robust measurement and research effort. And the third is country engagement, facilitating country engagement based on a whole of government approach. This approach encourages high-level leadership across time, connecting the dots between the sectoral programs and strengthening the evidence base. So it is a huge effort that is starting that combines both the technology disruptions that impact the future of work and how can human capital be strengthened in countries.
So one of the drivers of change is the incredible impact that digitization's having on the global south, and we've been very focused on Africa in this series as well, Sheila. Can you share how, for example, there was a McKinsey Global Institute report that projects by 2025, internet penetration will rise to 50%. That's 600 million new people on the internet in Africa alone. Can you talk about how these digitization trends are impacting the work of the World Bank?
Yes. So, Chris, we talked about the World Development Report that I mentioned earlier on the future changing nature of work. A sequel to that was also a study that done by the World Bank on the future of work in Africa, harnessing the potential of digital technology for all, which feeds exactly into the question you're asking. And the key message here is that that there is this digital technologies or disruptive technologies, if you will, have a great opportunity to forge a different pathway for Africa from the rest of the world. But if these technologies are to be harnessed correctly by government and businesses, of course, there need to be critical policies and investments in place. Because most African countries face different development challenges, such as lower levels of productive technology adoption and more underemployed people than in other regions, an increase of digital technology has the potential to have a positive impact on the economy. And if widely adopted, digital technologies have the promise of helping firms grow, and more importantly, create jobs for everyone, not just a privileged few. A few. However, as I mentioned before, governments need to ensure significant market competition, better entrepreneurial and worker human capital, better physical infrastructure, and so on. And because Africa also has a smaller manufacturing base, automation is not likely to displace as many workers over the next year. But at the same time, digital technology adoption can help businesses reduce their costs and prices, enable them to expand production, and employ jobs across all sectors while accessing internet and mobile application. Now, I just wanted to say I had very recently met the past rector of the African Virtual University, who put it nicely as in Africa, the need for education is so important. Poverty, violence, extremism is the root of these problems, is a major problem, and the root of this is lack of education. So I see that some of the tools, such as MOOCs and the use of smartphones and a variety of learning technologies, are providing a huge benefit to teacher education, somewhat as a continuous form for refresher. It's convenient, it's free, it counts to continuing education credits. So this is a critical need to address the shortage of teachers. Also to complement traditional education and bring in college and continuing ed and tertiary education to reach millions of African students. In the area of competitive skill-based education, with Africa being the youngest continent with over 2 million between the ages of 15 and 24, and this is expected to double, this could be a good impetus for using these tools. Also to strengthen the weak science and technology environment. For example, Coursera is partnering with, and we are involved in some way in this project with NetSap ICT in Tanzania to incorporate some of the market relevant IT skills for knowledge economy into a curricula. And finally, I think having a low cost, neutral, safe environment for women to create that gender balance, as they say, educate a woman and save a nation. So giving women an opportunity, a relatively flexible, low cost way to gather and strengthen their skills. Again, to deliver on this promise of really what we're talking about is democratization of education. Some of the barriers need to be overcome, such as internet, and that is happening, but also cost, availability of learning and content in different languages, and also the better policy reform to make this available for all and not just a privileged few.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that policy reform is sort of squarely in the area of operations of the World Bank, right?
Exactly. And the lessons learned, and how do you leapfrog in many cases and not take a traditional route.
What do you think are the technologies that are having the biggest impact on learning programs in these geographies? You talked about MOOCs, for example.
I think we have to look at, as we said before, the it's not about the transfer of learning. It's about peer learning and knowledge sharing. It's about case studies and more evidence-based results and solution. It's also about the ability to have a expert facilitation that's not just global but also local. We're using. I'd like to think of it more. Yes, the technology is important, but what are the different pedagogies, which is what I'm mentioning. So the need to move away from just what they call electronic page turners. I still see a lot of text being put on the web, to having opportunities to interact and participate, and using more innovative ways of role play and peer reviews and scenario analysis. Immersive learning is huge. And this also, we're trying to, so for example, on a complex topic such as results-based financing, we've used game-infused learning with storytelling and a little bit of gamification to motivate learners while engaging on serious issues. The other area is more experiential learning, because it's all about real world problems to help learners apply and integrate what they're learning to their own country context. So, use of cases and guided inquiry and reflection, learning labs, of course, simulation are very critical. So, we all of the different technologies, we good learning management platforms, but not just your traditional platforms, but more platforms that allow you to do many of the peer to peer and the experiential learning that I talked to you about. We're also exploring quite a bit with virtual reality and augmented reality, which becomes very important to create such scenarios and simulations that I mentioned. A good piece of, you mentioned we have something called the South-South knowledge sharing, where different countries learn from experiences of each other. And so I was just looking at one example to talk to you about. So, for example, if you're looking at fighting malnutrition in Madagascar, then you look at Bangladesh that dealt with a similar scenario. And so these could be a blended learning event, which includes some learning using e-learning platforms, but also followed up by site visits and community of practice tools and so on and so forth. To me, the technology really should support the pedagogical goals and aspirations. So one of the another example is we use e-learning to build foundational knowledge and skills on things like smart water tools, or using geospatial framework on land use management, or to help practitioners learn about solid waste management and so on. So we use e-learning to build the foundational concepts. And then we might do a technical deep dive with a select group of countries and practitioners within one country. And in this case, Korea, which had huge successful experiences on this, so that practitioners can learn through experiential site visits and so on, peer assist and networking. And then they prepare their action plans, and then there's an ongoing community of practice. In this case, the 6 countries keep in touch with each other, as well as with the World Bank and so on, for a sort of a global knowledge exchange on the specific area of solid waste or some of the other thematic areas I mentioned. Adaptive learning is also something we're looking at, very early stage. We're looking, I'm building a new program on in the sphere of the urban development, and let's see how that goes. One thing I'm finding is that creating an adaptive learning piece is very effective from the learner's point of view, but from the design sense, having to create multiple scenarios of the same topic can be quite resource intensive and costly. So we have to figure out a way to bring costs down by perhaps some agile development, and also probably some enhancements on the technology side as well.
These are trends that our audience would absolutely recognize as well. Is AI starting to impact your work, Sheila?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I mentioned to you my journey in AI started over 30 years ago. And finally, we're using chatbots to provide the first level of question and answer with the learner.